I'm Marcus Wilson, 32 years old, and I used to believe family meant everything. Growing up, my parents and older sister Natalie seemed like the perfect support system, but perfection has cracks and favoritism casts long shadows. When my wealthy parents decided to distribute their property investments, Natalie received a $3 million Florida villa, and me, an empty downtown parking lot. You can always sleep under the stars, they snickered. Before I continue this inheritance nightmare, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about turning betrayal into triumph. Life in our Boston suburb was comfortable but never equal. My father, Richard Wilson, built Wilson Property Development from nothing after graduating college with just $5,000 in his pocket and a relentless drive to succeed. He started by flipping small residential properties, then moved to commercial developments, eventually becoming one of the most respected real estate developers in Massachusetts. My mother, Eleanor, managed their growing portfolio of investments with calculating, precision tracking every dollar with the same attention she gave to maintaining our family's respectable image in the community. Our 5-bedroom colonial home in Wellesley wasn't ostentatious by neighborhood standards, but it provided us with every comfort imaginable. Private school education, summer camps, family vacations to Europe. We weren't the wealthiest family in town, but we certainly weren't struggling. My parents took pride in teaching us the value of money, or at least that's what they claimed. Looking back, the signs of favoritism were obvious from early childhood, but as a kid, you normalize your reality. For Natalie's 10th birthday, she received a custom-built treehouse that cost nearly $15,000, complete with electricity installation and beautiful handcrafted furniture. 3 years later, when I turned 10, I got a tent for the backyard and a sleeping bag. We want to encourage your love of nature, they explained. Every Christmas followed the same pattern. Natalie would unwrap the latest electronics designer clothes and whatever else topped her extensive wish list. I'd receive practical gifts. Clothes for school books, occasionally sports equipment if I'd shown interest in a particular activity. When I questioned the disparity once, my mother simply said, "Natalie has different needs than you do, Marcus. We love you both equally." I buried myself in academics, hoping scholastic achievements would finally earn their approval. I graduated valedictorian while maintaining a job at the local hardware store on weekends. My parents attended the ceremony, of course, clapping politely during my speech. But the celebration dinner that evening somehow transformed into a discussion about Natalie's upcoming college applications, despite her solidly average grades. Natalie knew exactly how to manipulate our parents. She'd dramatically share her struggles, ensuring they felt needed in her life. When she crashed her first car, she cried in my father's arms about how scared she'd been. He replaced the vehicle the following week. When she failed a college course, my mother hired an expensive tutor and convinced the professor to allow a makeup exam. Meanwhile, I solved my own problems quietly, never wanting to burden them, a strategy that only made me more invisible. One summer when I was 15, I worked landscaping jobs to save for a laptop I needed for my advanced placement courses. After 2 months of breaking my back in the Massachusetts humidity, I was $800 short. Instead of asking my parents for help, I settled for a refurbished model that frequently crashed. That same month, Natalie mentioned wanting to redecorate her bedroom during dinner. The next day, my parents hired an interior designer with a $5,000 budget. Despite everything, I loved my parents deeply. My father occasionally took me fishing, those rare one-on-one moments when I felt truly seen by him. My mother would sometimes find articles about business innovations and save them for me, knowing I was interested in entrepreneurship. These small gestures kept hope alive that someday they'd recognize my worth. The most painful memory comes from my 16th birthday. I'd been accepted into a prestigious summer business program at Yale, designed for promising high school students. The application process had been grueling. Essays, recommendations, a project proposal. When the acceptance letter arrived, I was ecstatic. The program cost $8,000, including 6 weeks of housing and instruction from business leaders and professors. I'd researched scholarships but couldn't find any I qualified for. "That's a significant investment," my father said when I showed them the letter. "Let's think about whether this is the best use of educational funds." 2 weeks later, they announced they couldn't afford the program because they'd just committed to funding Natalie's semester abroad in Paris, an optional program at her college with a $20,000 price tag. I never mentioned the business program again. I spent that summer working 2 jobs and reading business textbooks I borrowed from the local library. Years later, I would discover that 3 of the program's alumni had gone on to become successful venture capitalists, one of whom might have been a valuable connection for what I would eventually build. Through every disappointment, I told myself that someday my dedication would pay off. Someday they would see me, really see me, and recognize that I was worthy of the same love and support they lavished on Natalie. I held on to that hope like a life raft in increasingly turbulent waters. College choices laid bare the stark contrast in how my parents valued our futures. I received acceptance letters from several universities, including Cornell, which offered a partial scholarship covering about 60% of the tuition. When I brought the news to my parents, expecting at least some celebration, my father nodded and said, "That's still quite expensive. Massachusetts State has an excellent business program, and you could live at home to save on housing costs." The decision was essentially made for me. I attended Massachusetts State University while watching Natalie pack for Brown University, where our parents covered her full tuition housing in the most expensive dormitory option and a generous monthly allowance for incidentals. My college experience was defined by hustle. I worked 20 hours weekly at the campus bookstore, another 15 at a local restaurant on weekends, all while maintaining a full course load. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Meanwhile, Natalie's Instagram showed her at campus events, weekend trips to New York City, and spring break in Cancun. When she complained about her challenging schedule during family dinners, I would bite my tongue until it nearly bled. Despite the exhaustion, I thrived academically. My business degree with a minor in urban planning came with honors, and my professors recognized my potential. Dr. Harrington, my urban economics professor, connected me with several alumni in the commercial real estate industry, resulting in 3 job interviews before graduation. Graduation day highlighted the disparity once again. Natalie had graduated a year earlier, receiving a brand new BMW as her entry into adult life gift. She'd struggled to find employment that interested her, bouncing between 3 different jobs in her first year post-college. My parents seemed unbothered by her lack of direction, assuring her she had plenty of time to find her path. After I received my diploma, my parents presented me with a refurbished laptop. "For your job applications," my mother explained. I expressed genuine gratitude. The computer I'd been using was on its last legs, and I couldn't afford to replace it. Still, I couldn't help but calculate the difference between a $45,000 vehicle and an $800 laptop. I secured an entry-level position at Greenwood Commercial Properties, a mid-sized firm specializing in urban retail spaces. The starting salary was modest, but the potential for commission and advancement seemed promising. My 1-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood of Boston consumed nearly 40% of my monthly income, but it was mine, the first space that felt truly my own. At Greenwood, I discovered my talent for identifying undervalued properties. While more experienced colleagues chased obvious opportunities in developing neighborhoods, I researched city planning documents, attended community board meetings, and talked to local business owners about their challenges and needs. 6 months into the job, I brought in a client who purchased a seemingly undesirable warehouse space that I'd identified as the perfect location for a craft brewery based on upcoming transit developments and changing neighborhood demographics. "You've got good instincts, kid," my manager said, after the commission check cleared, my largest to date. I used that money to start building a modest investment portfolio, setting aside a percentage of each paycheck and bonus. While my friends were upgrading their lifestyles with each raise, I lived frugally, driving the same used Honda Civic I'd purchased in college and preparing most meals at home. Natalie's post-college journey took a different path. She moved through a series of increasingly prestigious job titles, each secured through our father's business connections. Yet none seemed to stick. She'd start enthusiastically, then gradually lose interest as the reality of workplace expectations set in. Between positions, our parents subsidized her apartment in Back Bay, one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. When she bounced a rent check after impulsively joining friends on a 2-week European vacation, my parents covered the shortfall and penalties without hesitation. When she decided her career needed a reset, and enrolled in a $20,000 life coaching certification program. They funded it entirely. The program remained unfinished 3 months later, when she discovered a passion for interior design instead. Despite the growing evidence that my business acumen surpassed my sister's, my parents rarely sought my input on financial matters. When they considered investing in a chain of fitness centers, I researched the market thoroughly and advised caution, noting several indicators of market saturation and changing consumer preferences. They dismissed my concerns and invested heavily. 18 months later, the company filed for bankruptcy protection, and my parents lost a significant amount. They never acknowledged that I'd been right. Through it all, I maintained hope that eventually my parents would recognize what I was building, not just a career but a knowledge base and skill set that could benefit our family. I dreamed of someday joining forces with my father, perhaps even taking over the family business when he retired. I imagined him finally saying the words I longed to hear, "I'm proud of you, son. You've earned your place." Instead, I received occasional distracted inquiries about how work was going during our increasingly infrequent family dinners, before conversation inevitably shifted to Natalie's latest endeavors or my parents' social engagements. I continued to show up, continued to hope for change, continued to believe that family meant something sacred that would eventually transcend the patterns of favoritism. That belief would soon be tested beyond anything I could have imagined. The text from my father came on a Tuesday afternoon family dinner this Friday at 7. "Your mother and I have some important matters to discuss with you and Natalie." The formal tone was unusual, piquing my curiosity. I confirmed my attendance and spent the next 3 days wondering what warranted such a scheduled announcement. Part of me dared to hope this might be about my father's long-mentioned but never-realized plans to bring me into the family business. I'd spent 8 years building my reputation at Greenwood, working my way up to senior property consultant with an impressive client roster. Perhaps they'd finally noticed my accomplishments. The thought sent a familiar surge of yearning through me, that childish desire for parental approval I couldn't seem to outgrow. I arrived at my parents' home exactly at 7, parking my Civic next to Natalie's latest vehicle, a luxury SUV, I recognized as a recent model worth at least $80,000. The contrast between our cars mirrored our lives. Hers flashy and expensive, mine reliable but unremarkable. The house smelled of my mother's beef Wellington, her standard meal for significant occasions. The dining room gleamed under chandelier light, the good china, and crystal arranged perfectly on the antique mahogany table that had been my grandmother's. Natalie was already seated, looking elegant in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Marcus." My mother air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "You look tired, darling. Are they working you too hard at that company?" Before I could answer, my father emerged from his study, crystal tumbler of scotch in hand. "Son," he nodded, clapping my shoulder. "Glad you could make it." Dinner began with casual conversation. My mother's charity committee work, my father's golf game, Natalie's recent weekend in the Hamptons with friends whose names were apparently supposed to impress me. I shared a brief update about a major client signing, which received polite nods before the topic shifted back to Natalie's social connections. After dessert, my mother's pavlova, another special occasion signal, my father cleared his throat and straightened in his chair. "Your mother and I have been doing some estate planning," he began, his tone shifting to what I recognized as his business voice. "At our age, it's important to have these matters arranged properly." My mother nodded, reaching for his hand. "We want to be transparent about our decisions while we're all together." I noticed Natalie sit up straighter, a smile playing at her lips. She knew something I didn't. "As you know," my father continued, "we've built a substantial portfolio over the years. The core of Wilson Property Development will transition to a management company upon my retirement, but we've decided to distribute certain assets to you both now rather than waiting." My heart quickened. Was this really happening? After years of feeling overlooked, were they finally including me in a meaningful way? "Natalie," my father turned to my sister with a warm smile I rarely saw directed at me. "We're transferring the Gulf Breeze property to you effective next month." The Gulf Breeze property, their vacation villa in Florida, a stunning 4-bedroom oceanfront home in an exclusive community. I'd visited once, marveling at the infinity pool that seemed to merge with the Gulf of Mexico beyond it. Last I'd heard, properties in that development were selling for around $3 million. Natalie squealed, jumping up to hug both our parents. Thank you, thank you. I've always loved that house." "We know, sweetheart," my mother beamed. "You've always appreciated beautiful things. The property has appreciated considerably. It's worth about $3.2 million now. A solid investment for your future." $3.2 million. Just hand it over. I sat frozen, waiting for the other shoe to drop for my parents to reveal what comparable gift they had planned for me. Natalie returned to her seat, practically glowing with excitement. 3 sets of eyes turned to me. My father cleared his throat again. "Marcus," he began, his tone noticeably different, more businesslike, less warm. "We've considered what would be appropriate for you." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, despite my racing thoughts. "You've always been practical, focused on business potential rather than luxury," he continued. "So we've decided to transfer ownership of the downtown lot to you." I blinked, momentarily confused. "The downtown lot? You mean the empty parking area on Franklin Street?" My mother smiled tightly. "That's the one. It's the last remaining undeveloped property in our portfolio." The last remaining undeveloped property. Translation: the property they hadn't bothered to do anything with because it wasn't worth developing. I knew the lot. A small, empty rectangle of cracked asphalt surrounded by a chain-link fence in a transitional area downtown. Last time I'd driven past it, someone had been sleeping in a tent in one corner. "The city has been making noise about that neighborhood for years," my father waved his hand dismissively. "Maybe someday it'll be worth something. In the meantime, you could probably rent it out for monthly parking if you want some income from it." My mind raced to calculate the value disparity. The lot was maybe 10,000 square feet in a questionable area. Even being generous, it might be worth $200,000, less than 1/10 the value of Natalie's gift. I struggled to find words that wouldn't betray the shock and hurt flooding through me. "Oh, don't look so disappointed," my father chuckled, misreading my expression entirely. "Property is all about vision. Maybe you'll see something in that lot that we missed. And if not," my mother added with a laugh that felt like a slap, "you can always sleep under the stars. Wasn't camping always your thing?" They both laughed at her joke. Natalie joined in after a beat, covering her mouth delicately, as if trying to hide her amusement. I forced a smile that felt like plastic stretching across my face. "Thank you for thinking of me." The words tasted like ash. "The paperwork is being prepared," my father continued, already moving on. "You'll need to sign everything next week. Our lawyer will contact you both." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. I excused myself as soon as was politely possible, citing an early meeting the next day. No one protested my departure. In my car, I sat motionless in the driveway for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The magnitude of the insult was almost incomprehensible. It wasn't just about the monetary value, though that disparity was staggering. It was the message behind it. You are worth less. You have always been worth less. 32 years of trying to earn their approval, of telling myself that someday they would see me crystallized into a single painful truth. They had seen me all along, they just didn't value what they saw. Tears burned behind my eyes as I finally started the engine. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking down in their driveway. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and swallowed sobs, my mind cycling through disbelief, rage, and a grief so profound it felt physical. By the time I reached my apartment, something had shifted inside me. The last remnants of childish hope had burned away, leaving something harder and clearer in its place. I wouldn't beg for scraps of their approval anymore. Whatever happened next, I would build it myself. The empty parking lot. The punchline to the cruel joke that had been my relationship with my parents. You can always sleep under the stars. Fine. Maybe I would. The morning after the dinner, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I needed to see this parking lot, my parking lot, with fresh eyes, not as the insult my parents intended, but as something else, what I wasn't sure yet. I arrived downtown just after 9, armed with coffee and a determination I couldn't quite name. The Franklin Street lot looked even worse in daylight than I remembered. Approximately 90 feet by 110 feet of cracked asphalt, surrounded by a rusting chain-link fence with faded no trespassing signs hanging at irregular intervals. Weeds pushed through the fractures in the pavement, and various pieces of trash had collected along the fence line. I sat in my car, staring at my inheritance through the windshield, trying to see past the neglect. The location was not terrible, actually. 2 blocks from the edge of the entertainment district, where new restaurants and bars had been opening over the past few years. Walking distance to the renovated theater that drew decent crowds on weekends. Street parking in the area was limited and expensive. A movement in the corner of the lot caught my eye. An elderly man with a weathered face emerged from behind a small cluster of overgrown bushes carrying a tattered backpack. He nodded at me cautiously as he made his way to the gate. I got out of my car and approached him. "Good morning." He regarded me warily. "Morning. You the new owner?" Surprised, I nodded. "How did you know?" "Seen you before driving by, real slow looking. Different from the other suits who come by." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Frank. I keep an eye on things around here." I shook his hand. "Marcus Wilson." "Wilson. Like the development company." His eyes narrowed. "My father," I confirmed. Frank nodded slowly. "Makes sense now." "Well, what are you planning to do with this patch of nothing? Put up another high-rise nobody who grew up here can afford?" The bitterness in his voice resonated with my own feelings. "I don't know yet. Just getting a feel for what I've got." Frank snorted. "What you've got is the last piece of downtown the developers haven't ruined yet." He gestured around. "I've been watching this neighborhood change for 40 years. Used to be families, small businesses. Now it's all overpriced coffee and fancy apartments." I found myself curious about his perspective. "You stay nearby?" "Here and there. Sometimes right there when weather permits." He pointed to the corner where I'd seen him emerge. "Your daddy's security guys stopped bothering me years ago. I don't make trouble, clean up after myself." "You know the area well then," I said, an idea beginning to form. Frank's expression softened slightly. "Better than anyone in a suit, that's for sure. Would you mind showing me around? I'd appreciate the local knowledge. I'll buy breakfast." To my surprise, he agreed. Over eggs and coffee at a nearby diner, Frank provided a crash course in the neighborhood's rhythms. The office workers who flooded in during weekdays, the weekend crowds heading to bars and restaurants, the tourists visiting the theater or small museum 3 blocks away. Parking's a nightmare, he mentioned, echoing my earlier observation. Especially weekends. City garage fills up fast and it's $15 minimum. "What do you think this neighborhood needs?" I asked, genuinely curious. Frank considered the question seriously. "Something for everyone. Not just the rich folks or the tourists. Something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart." After breakfast, I spent hours walking the surrounding blocks, studying pedestrian patterns, noting which businesses drew crowds and which sat empty. I counted parking spaces, observed traffic flow, and took photos of the lot from various angles. Back at my apartment, I began researching. City zoning regulations for the area, permit requirements for different types of businesses, development costs, property tax implications. I called former colleagues who specialized in urban renewal projects, carefully presenting hypothetical scenarios without revealing my personal stake. A pattern emerged from my research. The city had designated the area for mixed-use development, with incentives for projects that incorporated community benefits. There were rumors of a planned transit extension that would put a new subway stop within 3 blocks of the lot. Property values in the zip code had increased 22% over the past 3 years. My parents hadn't given me a worthless piece of land after all, just an undeveloped one. The realization didn't lessen the sting of their favoritism, but it did fuel my determination to prove them wrong. After a week of research and several more conversations with Frank, who'd become an unlikely consultant, an idea began to crystallize. The neighborhood had plenty of restaurants and bars, but they were increasingly high-end, catering to young professionals and tourists. What it lacked was variety, accessibility, and community space. The food truck revolution had largely bypassed downtown because of permit restrictions and lack of designated areas for them to operate. Meanwhile, local artisans and small vendors struggled to find affordable retail space to test their concepts. What if my worthless lot could become something unique? An upscale food truck park with rotating vendors combined with weekend space for local artisans and makers. Add some greenery seating areas, maybe a small performance space for local musicians. It could become a gathering place that served multiple community needs while generating revenue through vendor rent and possibly a small entrance fee for special events. The next day, I met with a loan officer at my bank. With my solid credit history, consistent income, and the property as collateral, I qualified for a business loan that would cover about 60% of my projected startup costs. The remainder would come from my personal savings, nearly all of it. This would mean leaving the security of my job at Greenwood. It would mean working longer hours than I already did. It would mean risking everything I'd built over the past decade on a concept that might fail spectacularly. As I weighed the decision, my phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Just signed the papers for the Gulf property. Mom and Dad are taking me out to celebrate. Did you get your paperwork yet? No mention of the disparity in our inheritances. No acknowledgement of the insult. Just casual acceptance of her golden child status. I scheduled a meeting with my bank for the following morning. Some decisions make themselves. Quitting my job at Greenwood felt like stepping off a cliff. 8 years of security connections and steady advancement, gone in a 15-minute conversation with my bewildered manager. You're leaving to develop a food truck park, he repeated clearly, struggling to understand. Marcus, you're on track for partnership in a few years. This seems impulsive. It wasn't impulsive. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a detailed business plan, consulting with a small business attorney, and mapping out every aspect of what I'd decided to call Starview Food Park, deliberately incorporating my parents' mocking suggestion about sleeping under the stars. The permit process nearly broke me before I'd even begun. The city planning department had never dealt with exactly this type of business model, before resulting in a bureaucratic nightmare of forms, inspections, and meetings. Each department seemed to have conflicting requirements. I spent entire days at City Hall moving from office to office with growing frustration. You need approval from the health department before we can issue this permit, one official would say. We can't approve anything until zoning has signed off, the health department would counter. Zoning approval requires prior clearance from transportation regarding parking impact, the next would explain. Round and round it went until I finally hired a permit expediter, an expense I hadn't budgeted for but a necessary one if I wanted to move forward this century. Meanwhile, I began approaching local food truck operators about my concept. The initial response was skeptical at best. We've been burned before, explained Carmen, who ran a popular Korean fusion truck, pop-up events that promised hundreds of customers and delivered dozens, venues that charged premium rates for prime locations, then packed in so many trucks nobody made money. This would be different, I insisted, showing her the renderings I'd commissioned from a friend's architectural firm at a discount. Dedicated spaces, reasonable flat rates, instead of percentages, marketing support and infrastructure, electricity, water hookups, waste disposal. Slowly, a few vendors expressed cautious interest, especially when I offered discounted rates for the first 3 months to the first 10 trucks that committed. With permits finally in progress and potential vendors tentatively on board, I turned to the physical transformation of the lot. The contractor I could afford, Jack Martinez, came recommended by Frank but arrived with his own set of challenges. Timeline's tight, Jack warned after reviewing my plans. And you're asking for a lot of specialized work. Electrical, plumbing, custom structures. Materials costs are through the roof right now. Can you do it or not, I asked directly. Jack scratched his beard. Yeah, I can do it. Can't promise it'll be pretty every step of the way. He wasn't kidding. Construction revealed one problem after another. Ancient utility lines that weren't on any city map. Soil contamination requiring specialized disposal. Unexpected drainage issues. Each discovery added to costs and delayed progress. My savings dwindled alarmingly. I downgraded from my already modest apartment to a tiny studio, sold my car, and bought a 10-year-old pickup truck instead, and cut every possible expense. I took on freelance consulting work on evenings and weekends, advising small businesses on property decisions while trying to build my own. Frank became an unexpected ally during this period. He appointed himself unofficial security guard for the construction site, preventing theft and vandalism that plagued other developments in the area. When he caught teenagers attempting to steal copper wiring one night, he not only ran them off but recovered the materials they'd already removed. "Least I can do," he shrugged when I tried to pay him. "You're building something different here, not just pushing people like me further out." I did insist on hiring him properly once I could afford it, complete with a small shed where he could store his belongings and sleep when weather demanded it. My first official employee. The aesthetic concept evolved around the sleeping under the stars theme, partly as a reclamation of the insult, and partly because it worked perfectly for an outdoor venue. I installed string lights crisscrossing overhead, creating a canopy of artificial stars. Seating areas featured comfortable chairs arranged around fire pits for cooler evenings. Along the perimeter we built raised garden beds filled with native plants and herbs, some of which the food vendors could harvest for their dishes. For the food trucks themselves, I created 10 dedicated spaces along 2 sides of the lot, each with its own electrical hookup water connection and small branded sign that could be changed as vendors rotated. The center of the lot became a dining area, with a mix of tables from 2-person cafe settings to longer communal tables that encouraged mingling. In one corner, we built a small covered stage for weekend music performances, comedy nights, or community events. The opposite corner featured a play area for children visible from all seating sections so parents could relax while keeping an eye on their kids. Every decision balanced budget constraints against my vision. I couldn't afford new tables, so I found a restaurant supply liquidator and purchased mismatched pieces that we unified with custom resin tops embedded with fairy lights, another nod to the star theme. When custom signage quotes came in too high, I partnered with a local art school offering free advertising for their program in exchange for their students creating our entrance mural and directional signs. As opening day approached, 18-hour workdays became my norm. I handled marketing myself, creating social media accounts, and a website distributing flyers to nearby businesses and apartment buildings, and reaching out to local food bloggers and news outlets. 2 weeks before our scheduled opening, disaster struck. A severe storm flooded the nearly completed site, damaging electrical systems and warping some of the wooden structures. Insurance would eventually cover most of it, but the immediate repairs required cash I didn't have. I sat in my truck in the rain-soaked lot at midnight, calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up to anything but failure. For one weak moment, I considered calling my parents for a loan. The thought evaporated as quickly as it formed. I would sell plasma before giving them the satisfaction. Instead, I called the vendors who had committed to opening day and explained the situation honestly. To my surprise, 3 of them offered to prepay their first month's rent to help cover repairs. Carmen, the Korean Fusion truck owner who'd been so skeptical, initially showed up the next day with her brother and cousin, both electricians, who offered to rewire the damaged sections at cost. "Food truck people stick together," she said simply. "You're one of us now." Those words, "one of us," hit me harder than I expected. All my life I'd been on the outside looking in, even in my own family. Now strangers were showing me more support than my parents ever had. We worked around the clock that final week, finishing repairs and adding final touches. The night before opening, I stood alone in the center of Starview Food Park, surrounded by twinkling lights that reflected in the glossy tabletops. It wasn't perfect. Several projects remained half-finished, hidden behind decorative screens. The landscaping was sparse, the stage smaller than I'd envisioned. But it was mine, created from nothing but determination and spite, and a refusal to be defined by others' expectations. The social media campaign had gained unexpected traction, particularly after a local lifestyle blogger shared our Sleeping Under the Stars origin story, a carefully edited version that presented my parents' comment as a challenge, rather than an insult. By opening day morning, our Instagram account had over 2,000 followers, and the event page showed nearly 500 people interested in attending. I tried to temper my expectations. Social media interest rarely translated directly to attendance. If we got 100 people throughout the day, I'd consider it a success. By noon, there was a line at the entrance. By 2 o'clock, all 10 food trucks had lines of their own. By evening, we'd welcomed over 800 visitors, and several vendors had sold out completely. Starview Food Park was officially open for business, and against all odds, it appeared to be a hit. The success of opening weekend wasn't a fluke. Over the next months, Starview's popularity grew steadily, driven by word of mouth and social media. Local food bloggers praised our rotating vendor lineup, and the weekend artisan market quickly became a destination for people seeking unique, locally made goods. By month 3, we had a waiting list of food trucks wanting to secure a spot in our rotation. I implemented a system that balanced established vendors with newcomers, ensuring regular customers would find both familiar favorites and new options each visit. Weekday lunch business boomed with nearby office workers, while evenings and weekends drew a diverse crowd from across the city. The financial reality exceeded my most optimistic projections. By month 4, I'd repaid 20% of my bank loan and was able to begin drawing a modest salary instead of living off dwindling savings and credit cards. By month 6, I hired 2 part-time staff members to help with daily operations, giving me occasional evenings off for the first time since construction began. Local press took notice. The city's major lifestyle magazine featured Starview in a spread about urban renewal, praising our community-centered approach and accessible price point that democratizes the gourmet food experience. A local news station ran a human interest story about Frank, now our official site manager, and his journey from homelessness to employment. The publicity brought even more customers. Expansion happened organically. We added a Sunday morning farmers market that complemented the artisan vendors. Live music performances, initially scheduled only on weekend evenings, became a nightly feature due to popular demand. When customers repeatedly requested merchandise, we partnered with a local screen printing shop to create branded t-shirts and tote bags which sold out within days. Through it all, I heard nothing from my family. I hadn't expected to. The paperwork transferring ownership of the lot had been handled through attorneys with no direct contact required. I'd seen my parents' names in the local business journal, occasionally announcing new developments or charity contributions, but our paths hadn't crossed in the months since the inheritance dinner. Until Natalie showed up unannounced one Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing applications from potential new vendors when Frank knocked on my office door, a repurposed shipping container at the edge of the property that served as our administrative headquarters. "There's a lady here asking for you," he said, his expression making clear he didn't approve of the visitor. "Says she's your sister." My stomach tightened. "Thanks, Frank. I'll come out." Natalie stood near the entrance, looking dramatically out of place in designer clothes and impractical shoes, surveying the lunch crowd with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she spotted me approaching, her face arranged itself into a familiar smile, the one she used when she wanted something. "Marcus, this place is amazing. Why haven't you told us about it?" No greeting, no acknowledgement of our months without contact. Typical Natalie. "Hello to you too," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What brings you here?" "I was meeting a friend nearby for lunch and saw the sign." She gestured toward our entrance. "Wilson's an unusual name for a food park. Then I remembered Dad mentioned giving you some old lot downtown. I had no idea you'd done all this with it." The genuine surprise in her voice might have been comical if it weren't so revealing. She'd never even considered that I might create something successful from what our parents had dismissively tossed my way. "Would you like a tour?" I offered, professional courtesy overriding personal feelings. For the next 30 minutes, I showed her around the property, explaining the concept and operation. To my surprise, she asked intelligent questions about vendor selection, revenue model, and expansion plans. I'd forgotten that beneath the self-absorption, Natalie possessed a sharp mind when she chose to use it. "This must be generating significant income," she observed as we concluded the tour, her tone casual but her eyes calculating. "The location is perfect for what you've created." "It's doing well," I acknowledged without elaborating. "And you own the property outright?" she pressed. "No partners or investors?" Warning bells sounded in my mind. Why the sudden interest in my business model, Natalie? She shrugged elegantly. Family interest. You've created something impressive here, little brother. I'm sure Mom and Dad would love to hear about it. They know where to find me if they're interested, I replied, keeping my voice even. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have vendors to meet with. 2 weeks later, my phone displayed my mother's name, the first direct contact in over 8 months. The text was brief. Dinner this Friday, 7 p.m. Your father and I would love to catch up. Natalie will be there too. My instinct was to decline, but curiosity won out. I confirmed my attendance with a similarly brief response. Friday evening found me once again in my parents' dining room, the setting eerily similar to the inheritance dinner that had changed everything. The same fine china, the same carefully prepared meal, the same superficial pleasantries as we took our seats. The first difference emerged when my father asked about work. Instead of the perfunctory inquiry that usually preceded a quick subject change, he seemed genuinely interested. Natalie tells us you've developed quite the operation downtown, he said, studying me with new eyes. A food truck venue of some kind. Starview Food Park, I confirmed, noting how both my parents leaned forward slightly. It's a multi-vendor food and community space. How creative, my mother remarked. And the name, Starview, that's charming. I met her gaze directly. I thought it fitting given the circumstances. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face before she recovered. Well, it sounds like you've found your niche. We'd love to see it sometime. You should have told us what you were building, my father added, his tone somewhere between reproach and admiration. We might have been able to help. The audacity nearly took my breath away. I wasn't aware you were interested in my projects. An uncomfortable silence fell before Natalie smoothly changed the subject to safer topics. Throughout the meal, however, I noticed my father watching me with an expression I'd rarely seen directed my way: respect, perhaps even a hint of pride. After dessert, he cleared his throat in the familiar way that signaled a transition to business matters. Your mother and I have been discussing your development, he began. It's impressive what you've accomplished in such a short time, particularly given the limitations of the property. Thank you, I said, simply waiting for whatever was coming next. We've been thinking, he continued, that it might make sense to bring your operation under the Wilson Development umbrella. There it was. In what capacity? We could form a subsidiary, he explained, warming to the topic. Wilson Urban Venues, perhaps. Your food park would be the flagship property, but with our capital and connections we could expand the concept to other locations. Multiple properties across the city, possibly regional expansion within a few years. We've always intended to bring you into the family business. Eventually, my mother added, rewriting history with breathtaking ease. This seems like the perfect opportunity. I maintained a neutral expression. What exactly are you proposing? My father outlined the offer. They would purchase a 51% stake in Starview, providing capital for improvements and expansion. I would remain as manager of the original location and have a role in developing new properties. The business would benefit from the Wilson name and corporate infrastructure. You'd have resources you simply can't access on your own, he emphasized. Marketing budgets, development teams, political connections. And what would this partnership cost me beyond control of my company, I asked directly. My father named a figure that, while not insulting, reflected a significant undervaluation of what I'd built. That's based on current revenue, he explained. Of course, the real value is in what we can build together going forward. Natalie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. It makes sense, Marcus. That lot was part of the family portfolio anyway. This way, everything stays connected. Something in her phrasing caught my attention. Was the Florida property also part of the family portfolio, Natalie? She blinked, caught off guard. Well, yes, but that's different. How so? I pressed. The villa was always meant for personal use, my mother interjected. Your project is clearly a commercial venture. A surprisingly successful one, my father added, his tone suggesting he still couldn't quite believe it, which is why incorporating it into our larger operation is the logical next step. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They truly believed I would jump at this offer, that after a lifetime of being the less favored child, I would gratefully hand over my creation for their approval and a check that represented a fraction of its worth. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm not interested in selling any portion of Starview at this time. The shocked silence was almost comical. You're turning us down. My father's incredulity would have been insulting if it weren't so predictable. I am. Marcus, my mother, said in her reasonable voice, you need to think about the bigger picture, the family legacy. I have thought about it, I replied, for 32 years actually, and I've decided to build my own legacy. My father's expression hardened. That property was only meant as a starting point. We never anticipated you'd actually develop it independently. And there it was, the truth behind the gift. They'd never expected me to do anything worthwhile with it. The lot was meant to be a placeholder, a token inheritance that wouldn't require them to treat me equally, but would prevent me from claiming they'd completely disinherited me. Then I suppose we've all been surprised, I said evenly. You're being short-sighted, my father insisted, frustration coloring his tone. That lot is surrounded by properties we're developing. Your little food park doesn't fit our long-term vision for the area. Perhaps you should have considered that before transferring ownership to me, I suggested. Natalie, sensing the conversation derailing, attempted intervention. Marcus, be reasonable. You've created something nice, but you must realize you owe some of that success to the family name and connections. I turned to her, genuinely curious. Which connections would those be, Natalie? The ones that never returned my calls. The business associates who didn't know I existed until Starview started getting press. That's not fair, my mother protested. No, I agreed. It hasn't been fair for a very long time. My father's face had reddened, a sign I recognized from childhood as preceding an outburst. This is about the inheritance, isn't it? You're holding a grudge because your sister received a more valuable property. This is about recognizing my worth, I corrected him. Something I've finally learned to do for myself since no one in this family ever did. We could pursue this legally, he threatened, his voice dropping. There were conditions in the transfer that could be invoked. I had anticipated this possibility. My attorney reviewed the paperwork thoroughly before I began development. The transfer was clean and unconditional, but by all means pursue whatever legal avenues you believe might exist. The stunned silence confirmed what I'd suspected. The threat was empty. I stood placing my napkin beside my half-eaten dessert. Thank you for dinner. I should get back to my business. Marcus, my mother called as I reached the dining room doorway. Don't leave like this. We're family. I paused, turning back to face them one last time. You're right. We are family. But that doesn't entitle you to what I've built from the scraps you tossed me. As I walked to my truck, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more seeking approval that would never come. No more measuring my worth against Natalie's golden child status. No more hoping that someday they would see me. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I could see myself clearly now, and that was enough. The threat of legal action empty, as it was still warranted precaution. The morning after the confrontational dinner, I met with my attorney to ensure Starview was fully protected against any potential claims. She reviewed the property transfer documents and confirmed what I already knew. My parents had no legal grounds to challenge my ownership or development of the lot. The paperwork is ironclad, she assured me. They transferred full ownership with no conditions or reversal clauses. Whatever their intentions might have been legally, that parking lot is yours to do with, as you please. With that concern addressed, I refocused entirely on growing the business. Starview's first anniversary approached, and we'd exceeded all financial projections. The waiting list for vendor spots had grown so long that I began exploring the possibility of expanding to a second location. Using profits from the first year of operation, I purchased a similar-sized lot 8 miles away near the University District. The area had different demographics but similar needs. Limited dining options, few community gathering spaces, and a population that appreciated the food truck culture. Construction began with a more streamlined process informed by lessons from the original site. Frank Now, our full-time operations manager, took increasing responsibility for day-to-day management of the original location, allowing me to divide my attention between both sites. His journey from homeless observer to trusted executive embodied everything I wanted Starview to represent: opportunity, community, and second chances. "Never thought I'd have business cards," he chuckled the day they arrived, running weathered fingers over the embossed logo. "Guess sleeping under the stars worked out for both of us." We formalized our commitment to community support, establishing a mentorship program for disadvantaged youth interested in culinary careers or small business ownership. 3 days each week, local teens shadowed food truck operators, learning both cooking skills and business management. Several graduates of the program went on to secure jobs with our vendors or other local restaurants. The impact of Starview extended beyond our physical locations. Other property owners in the area surrounding the original site began improving their buildings and spaces, recognizing the increased foot traffic and changing perception of the neighborhood. What had once been a transitional area with safety concerns became an emerging hotspot for small businesses and community events. This revitalization caught the attention of the local business association, which presented me with their annual Urban Renewal Award, an acrylic star fittingly mounted on a wooden base now displayed prominently in our office. The recognition brought another wave of media attention, further cementing Starview's reputation as a community success story. Through all this growth and recognition, I maintained my distance from my family. They made several attempts at reconciliation. My mother's carefully worded text messages, my father's calls that went to voicemail, even Natalie stopping by the park, unannounced one afternoon, only to be politely but firmly turned away by Frank, who had appointed himself my unofficial gatekeeper. 6 months after our confrontational dinner, I received an email from my father with the subject line, "We need to talk." The body contained just one line: "Family matters aside, we have a business proposition that benefits everyone." I didn't respond. Whatever proposition they had in mind, I wasn't interested. My business was thriving without their involvement, and I'd finally broken free of the need for their approval. A week later, Natalie called. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Marcus, you need to call Dad," she began without preamble. "This is serious." "I'm not interested in any business propositions," I replied evenly. "It's not about your food park," she insisted, a note of genuine stress in her voice. "The Florida property has issues. Serious structural problems that weren't disclosed when they transferred it to me. The repairs will cost hundreds of thousands, and I don't have that kind of liquid capital right now." I felt a twinge of sympathy despite myself. "I'm sorry to hear that, Natalie. What does this have to do with me?" "Dad and Mom are having some cash flow problems with their newest development. They can't help me right now. I thought maybe you." The request hung unspoken between us. After everything, she still expected me to bail her out, to use the profits from my little project to save her luxury villa. "No," I said simply. "Marcus, please. This is my home we're talking about." "You have a condo in Boston," I reminded her. "The villa is an investment property just like my parking lot was supposed to be." "That's different," she protested. "Yes," I agreed. "It is different. Your investment was handed to you fully formed and valued at over $3 million. Mine required vision, risk, and work to become something valuable. That's a very important difference." She was quiet for a moment. "So you won't help? Because you're still angry about the inheritance." "I'm not angry anymore," I realized as I said it. "I'm grateful, actually. If they'd given me something comparable to what they gave you, I might never have built Starview. I might still be working at Greenwood, still seeking their approval, still defining my worth by their recognition. So you're punishing us all for doing you a favor?" Her voice had taken on the familiar snippy tone of our childhood arguments. I laughed, genuinely amused by her perspective. "I'm not punishing anyone, Natalie. I'm running my business and living my life. You should try doing the same." Before ending the call, I did offer one thing. Not money, but advice on how she might address the structural issues more affordably, based on connections I'd made through developing Starview. Whether she followed up on those suggestions, I never learned. What I did learn over the months that followed was that my parents' financial situation was more precarious than anyone outside the family knew. Their newest development, a luxury condominium complex, had encountered significant problems from construction delays to changing market conditions. Investors were pulling out, and the project was at risk of failing entirely. I heard about this not from my family but from industry contacts who didn't realize the connection. Wilson Development's in trouble, a former colleague mentioned during a chance encounter. Word is, they're looking for a bailout investor, or they'll have to declare bankruptcy on the River Point project. The news should have brought satisfaction, cosmic justice for years of favoritism and dismissal. Instead, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Not glee, not quite sympathy, but something adjacent to both. When my parents finally came to Starview nearly 18 months after our confrontation dinner, I wasn't entirely surprised. They arrived without appointment on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, looking simultaneously uncomfortable and determined. Frank called me immediately. "Those people are here. Your folks. Want me to send them packing?" "No," I decided after a moment's consideration. "I'll see them in the office." They looked older than I remembered, more worn down. My father, once the embodiment of confident success, seemed diminished somehow. My mother's perfectly maintained appearance showed small cracks, roots needing touch-up, a handbag that wasn't this season's. "Marcus," my father began awkwardly, "your place it's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, neither cold nor welcoming. "What can I do for you?" They exchanged glances before my mother spoke. "We wanted to clear the air. There have been misunderstandings." I understood perfectly. I corrected her gently. "You valued Natalie more. You expected less from me. You never thought I'd amount to much." "That's not true," my father protested, but without conviction. "We made mistakes," my mother admitted, surprising me with her directness. "We treated you unfairly. We didn't see your potential." "Or you saw it and felt threatened by it," I suggested, "because I built something successful without your help or approval." My father flinched but didn't deny it. "We're proud of what you've created here," he said instead. "Truly proud. We should have seen what you were capable of long ago." "Is that why you're here? To tell me you're proud now that I've proven my worth?" "We're here because we miss you," my mother said, her voice cracking slightly. "And yes, because we were wrong. About you, about how we treated you, about everything." I studied them, searching for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What I saw instead was something I'd never expected: genuine regret. "And the River Point project?" I asked quietly. "I've heard there are problems." My father straightened, slightly professional pride, momentarily overriding humility. "Nothing we can't handle." My mother shot him a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We didn't come about business," she insisted. "We came about family." And perhaps they had. Perhaps hitting rock bottom financially had forced them to reassess what truly mattered. Perhaps seeing what I'd built from nothing had made them question their assumptions about both their children. Perhaps they were genuinely sorry. Or perhaps they still wanted something from me. The truth probably contained elements of both. "I appreciate you coming," I said carefully, "and I accept your apology. But rebuilding trust takes time. I'm not ready for family dinners and holiday gatherings just yet." Relief and disappointment warred on my mother's face. "But someday, there's a possibility." "There's always possibility," I acknowledged. "But my terms, my timeline, and complete separation between family and business matters." My father nodded slowly. "Fair enough." As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. "For what it's worth, your sister's struggling with the villa situation. The repair costs keep mounting." I smiled slightly. "She mentioned that. I gave her some contractor recommendations that might help." "But not money," he observed. "No," I confirmed. "Not money. She needs to learn the same lesson I did, how to build something for herself." After they left, I walked through Starview during the dinner rush, watching families and friends gathered around tables, enjoying food and conversation beneath the canopy of lights. Frank nodded to me from his position near the entrance, where he was chatting with regular customers. On the small stage, a local acoustic duo played for an attentive audience. All of this from an empty parking lot, all of this from sleeping under the stars. The second location was nearing completion, and I'd begun preliminary talks about franchising the concept to other cities. The mentorship program had expanded to include business planning workshops and startup microgrants for promising graduates. Life had taken a shape I couldn't have imagined 2 years earlier. Most importantly, I'd found a kind of peace that had nothing to do with my parents' belated approval. Their recognition, or lack thereof, no longer defined me. I'd built something valuable not just in business terms, but in human terms. Starview had become a community, a place where people from different backgrounds came together, where second chances were possible, where value wasn't determined by pedigree or privilege. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, the artisan baker I'd been dating for the past several months, after meeting her at our weekend market. Still on for dinner after closing, she'd written, followed by a star emoji that had become our private shorthand. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, adding my own star. I looked up at the actual stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above the park. They had always been there, I realized, constant and unchanging regardless of who noticed them or appreciated their light. Much like my own worth, had always existed whether my family acknowledged it or not. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as rejection. Sometimes being underestimated is the perfect motivation to exceed all expectations. And sometimes sleeping under the stars isn't a punishment, but a privilege, a chance to see the world from a different perspective and build something truly your own. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned from someone underestimating you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of turning rejection into success resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. Thank you for joining me under the stars today. Remember, sometimes the darkest nights produce the brightest opportunities.